Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to the Nimzo-Indian Masterclass. This is the final episode in this masterclass where we will combine all of the theory we learned and all of the ideas we learned in the previous chapters into one video where we are going to look at 3 super instructive model games that will teach you at a grandmaster level how players go about winning and converting the Nimzo-Indian Defense. So as I said, I picked 3 games. One of them is by Liren with the black pieces. The other 2 are actually by Viswanathan. As it turns out, Viswanathan had a period in 2009 where he played the Nimzo-Indian a lot. So there's some really good instructive games that I pulled from that time period. So we're going to look at those 3 games. The other thing that I made sure was that in the Nimzo-Indian, we covered the most common and popular choices. And so these model games are hopefully going to illustrate what you're going to see in a majority of your games with the Nimzo-Indian, and that will be the Rubinstein systems with E3. This will be the first game we look at, and the second 2 games we look at will be Queen to C2, the classical system, which are the 2 most popular systems that white can choose. So let's go ahead and jump into the first game already. This was, as I said, Liren with the black pieces and Martin Kravtsiv with the white pieces. This is a Ukrainian grandmaster, super strong player. Let's see what happens. So we had E3, as I hinted upon. We castle, bishop D3, D5, and now we take. This is exactly what I recommend in my theory-based chapter. White castles, we take, and now B6. We got this exact position. And if you recall, the plans and ideas that I mentioned in that video included bishop to b7, at some point taking this knight. Whether or not they provoke you with a3 is irrelevant. We want to take for a very important purpose of then getting the rooks onto the D and C file to target these 2 pawns, which are going to be difficult to defend. And that's exactly the plan that black went for here. So this is a beautiful example, something super realistic that you could see. So black eventually took, transitioned into this pawn structure, playing against the hanging pawns, and again the rooks will land on the C and D file and try to attack these pawns. The other thing that I want to emphasize is this concept of simple chess. Black plays super simple moves and ideas and ends up beating a grandmaster. And you'll see it's really beautiful to see. So black's idea is very simple. They just want to trade all of these minor pieces. If all of the minor pieces get traded, then these 2 hanging pawns will become more crucial, and essentially the 3 major pieces for black will be attacking these hanging pawns. The 3 major pieces for white will have a defensive role in defending, and of course it's better to be attacking. So this simple concept is exactly what motivated all of these moves, just trading every piece. And indeed, here, finally, black managed to trade all of the minor pieces. So simple ideas and plans. Now, indeed, the rooks managed to centralize on the C and D file, as I talked about, going for these 2 pawns. Here, eventually, we see a queen trade as well, and now it's just rooks. And again, these 2 rooks in red are much more active than their counterparts because they have aggressive attacking roles. And that plays all the difference. So we have b5 to support the rooks, and now this nice idea of going f6 and e5 to expand in the center. And you'll see white tries to activate their rooks, but it's just too little too late. a6 to support and defend, and now the big threat, almost unstoppable threat, is to go ahead and take and expose this king. In fact, I don't see a way to stop it. And indeed, black managed to win a pawn here, then trade off a set of rooks. And although conversion here is definitely not an easy task, black has all of the initiative, all the fun. They're definitely in no risk of losing this game. It's just a matter of drawing or more likely winning this position. And black managed to convert very beautifully. Of course, this pawn is more important than this pawn, because if this pawn falls, then these 2 pawns both become passed and uncontested. if this pawn falls, these two pawns still have to deal with this pawn on g7. And so after this check, the king moved to f6, allowing the rook to take for this sole reason that I just explained, the pawns not being equal in value. In fact, black could have even persisted with king d4 with the same idea of trading the two pawns, but now the point is this king is much more active. So after the two pawns get traded, the king could also assist over here, and if white were to try to defend, now the king is still more active and can try to push on something like that. So that would have been a small improvement, but there's no reason to take these risks. You can always do them later. You have infinite moves here, and indeed, eventually black managed to chip away, trade some of these pawns. There was a very nice endgame technique right around here. You definitely do not want to trade this pawn for this pawn, because now this pawn is very far away from black's pieces, but very close to white's pieces. So although perhaps this is still winnable, it doesn't look too easy at all. So black managed to do a beautiful technique, first by giving a check, then rerouting the rook to defend from the c6 square, and then picking up the pawn this other way while still defending the other two pawns. And now, with the two connected passed pawns, it's just a matter of time until black can promote these pawns. And it did take some time, for sure, but eventually black managed to slowly push the pawns a lot of moves later. And eventually, with enough patience, black managed to make good progress. There was a beautiful, gorgeous ending to this game here, actually, under promotion to a knight checkmate, which is super rare and super beautiful, but totally unnecessary, of course. Black could win in a million different ways here as well. The thing I want to mention, though, is the simplicity of this. It might seem like black had to grind an entire endgame to get to this position, and that is true, but notice from the opening, white has, of course, an advantage in the beginning because they're the white players. They have the extra move, but very quickly, I mean, by here already, black has the advantage. Black has all the initiative, and black has the aggressive pieces. It's almost as if the colors switched, and sure, the game took many, many moves of grinding in this rook endgame, but at all times, black was never at risk of losing, and it was a very smooth game in that sense. So I really think this is an instructive game, and aside from the ending being super gorgeous, you can learn a lot from the opening and middle game of this instructive model game. Game number 2 is Viswanathan playing against Karpov, and we have queen c2 as promised, a very popular move that you might see. And again, this is exactly what I'm recommending in the course. So we have d5 expanding, and now knight to e4. And if you recall, one of the ideas here that I mentioned was a big expansion on the king side. Because the queen is cut over from here, and because black lacks in development, you can get away with expanding and making the development even more difficult. And that's exactly what you see illustrated here. So g5, f5, and f4, and just super aggressive moves played here. Really, really beautiful opening, because look at the disparity in development. This bishop is super beautiful, cutting the king. Black has all their minors developed, and even though the king seems exposed, there's just no development in the other camp, and so there's no way to take advantage of that. We have queen d7. Again, what I would emphasize here is the clear disparity of pieces and activity. These two knights carrying some immense weight on their shoulder, and this bishop once again super strong. In fact, one potential idea in many of these positions is rook f6 and rook c6, this rook lift to force the king towards the center, and then once the king is really isolated in the center, it's just a matter of time until we can find the way to crack through. That is indeed what happened through a different channel, the queen check instead, and perhaps that's also a smart option because the rook later got a beautiful roll, as you will see. We have rook f4 kicking away the queen, the knight reroutes, and now check, and a beautiful finish. Rook takes f2. Here, white resigned because, of course, if rook takes, then queen takes will seal the deal. Even though material is actually rather equal, the imbalance of two pieces for a rook favors black here tremendously because every piece can get in. The queen is already super active with all of these threats in the air, all these checks and whatnot. The bishop can come in either through this diagonal, or currently it's still just closing off any escape squares for the king. The knight can come in, being super powerful, attacking the rook, attacking this fork, just so many potential targets for the knight, and the rook can come in once the knight moves over through the d file or potentially the e file. So all of black's pieces are much more active than white's. And for the final game, we have once again Viswanathan with the black pieces playing this time against Yevgeny Bareev. This was from 2009 again, and we have queen to c2. And again, after castles, we have a3. So just as a reference point, if the theory here seems unfamiliar, maybe you forgot the content we discussed earlier in this masterclass, the theory of these three games stem from chapter 1 and chapter 4 of this masterclass. So that is the Rubinstein system with bishop d3 and the queen to c2 classical system with a3. So those are the two chapters you should reference if this theory seems unfamiliar, because we did indeed cover it super in depth in those chapters. Okay, so here instead of c takes on d5, which is what we saw in the previous game, where again knight e4 came and then we took back, we have this time knight to f3 in the game. So black took, and here we see Viswanathan using a plan that I again introduced in those chapters, which was dragging the queen onto this diagonal and then trying to occupy this diagonal with the bishop. Now in this specific case, the bishop did indeed go to a6. We had a bishop to g5 here to pin the knight, and immediately this queen is hit and it has to make a choice. Queen to c2 is one of the moves we discussed, and again c5 was one of the plans that is common that we mentioned, and here it was played very quickly. And again, white has to sort of forget about the queen side. Let us do all of these moves in order to get time to develop and castle, because otherwise they will not make it out of the opening. So we have the time to play c5, to get our rook to c8, really uncontested, and they can't do much about it. So here the queen moved out and tried to attack the bishop. The bishop simply moved back. We already did the purpose of harassing the queen, forcing them to develop a little less actively, and forcing the queen to just frankly move many times in the opening. So the bishop reroutes again, forcing the queen to move once again. We have h6, the bishop moves back to e3, and now c4. Very beautiful idea to shut this bishop in. The whole point was if we were to take, then the bishop could consider taking, and then this pawn could eventually launch. But by closing, we're highlighting how misplaced this bishop really is. And the pawn was then supported with b5. Now the knight can come in. The bishop is really contesting this other counterpart bishop, and these 3 pawns versus 2 pawns majority on the queen side is definitely a key character of this position. And indeed, we can see great advancements being made. Eventually c3 is pushed, takes, and c3 was a very genius pawn sacrifice. The idea was to again get this hanging pawns, not exactly because there's this e-pawn, but a similar structure to what we've already seen, where this pawn is just super weak, and because of these 2 pawns here, this pawn can't do anything. It can never get rid of itself, and so this pawn will most certainly be taken at some point, and indeed it was pretty quick to be taken. We then have the knight maneuvering further, the rooks again getting comfortable on the most active C and D files. And what I should emphasize here, as we've seen throughout the entire video, all of the 3 games, is the disparity in piece activity. These rooks get active almost always more quickly than these rooks, especially, like, look at this rook. It hasn't moved, right? And same with this knight. It's done so many more things in this game, and we've seen that pattern again and again. And in this game, it's certainly is shown. For example, look at this position. I mean, the two rooks are just dominating over here. This rook hasn't moved. This rook's quite good, to be fair, but one of the only pieces that's good, because now this knight is attacked, and here white had to hold on by going king f1, but even this, even though the engine can hold on, doesn't seem so promising, because again, the imbalance in piece activity is too apparent. This rook can't really ever activate because it will, by doing so, leave this a-pawn, and you might think, can't this a-pawn promote? It's too slow. Eventually, these two rooks will be able to stop it in one way or another. There's many ways to go about this sort of position, but I find it very unlikely that this will be good, and white will be able to hold it. Again, even though the computer might be able to hold the draw here, in the game that's irrelevant though, because white blundered horribly with knight d1, which you can't really blame white for. Again, it was a very difficult position, but now rook to d3 sealed the win. Very beautiful, gorgeous geometry on the board. The knight has nowhere to go, because if it goes here, just to emphasize, you can take because of the pin, and the knight is just lost. It's simply a trapped piece. So, and this final position, even more so than ever before, emphasizes the disparity in piece activity. These two rooks just totally dominating, and two of the pieces are on the back rank for white. So hopefully you enjoyed this video and this masterclass as a whole. I really tried to make this masterclass super extensive and covering all of the lines and theories that you will need to know to tackle the Nimzo-Indian defense. Subscribe if you want more projects like this masterclass in the future. Like this video if you enjoyed this masterclass and this video specifically, and I will see you guys next time. Peace out.